The ancient games at Olympia. Let's talk about politics and cheating, because both of these were evidently occurring back in those ancient times. I'll start with politics, and it makes perfect sense in many ways, because if you think about it, the games at Olympia, like the other Pan-Hellenic games, meant that you had people travelling from across the Mediterranean. Remember, all of those Greek city-states across the Mediterranean, and they were coming to one place. And of course, lots of conversations could therefore be had. So there was a lot of stuff that was going, shall we say, informally. But there was also some pretty formal stuff. And we can see this or hear about it from Pausanias, for example, in his descriptions of some of the statues. Take, for example, Pantarces of Elis. He'd been successful in a horse race there. But it wasn't actually his home city-state that set up the statue. It was the Achaeans, and they'd done that because he'd negotiated a peace treaty between the two peoples and the release of some prisoners. And it might not just be statues. Thucydides mentioned a bronze pillar set up and dedicated to celebrate a peace treaty between a number of Greek city-states. Of course, it might work the other way as well. Those trophies, those statues, dedications, they're also a way for the Greek city-states to announce how powerful they are and how they might have one up over another Greek city-state rival. And there's a really good example of this, and I'll pin that video specifically to my profile. But in short, it was a statue that had been set up by descendants of those who'd rebelled against Sparta, and they put quite a large statue up there, and they kind of hinted at that in the inscription. And the Spartans, it's always the Spartans, isn't it? Gives me an opportunity to segue into cheating, but perhaps not in the way you might expect. So in 420, the Spartans were actually banned from the Olympics because they'd violated the Olympic truce, and of course they weren't happy about that. And there was an individual called Lycas, and what he did was he had horses and he entered them in a chariot race, but not as Spartans, because of course Sparta couldn't be involved in those games. But he entered them under Thebes, and they won. Now, if he just left it like that, he might have just had a bit of a tongue-in-the-cheek moment, and he knew, but perhaps others didn't. But he didn't want to do that because Spartans got a Sparta. He wandered out into the middle of the track and awarded the charioteer the prize himself. Yeah, that was me. Look what I've just done. He didn't get away with it completely, though, but it did cause uproar. Apparently, he was beaten quite badly by the judges. Now, this idea of someone actually competing not for the city-state that they're from was a bit more common than you might think. And there's instances of people either successfully being bribed in order to compete for a city-state that they weren't from, or being approached by a city-state, usually very wealthy ones, and asked, do you fancy coming in and declaring yourself for us and winning that event? And you might understand why, because after all, if you won an event, it wasn't just you that got the glory, it was the city-state that you were competing for. Bribes might occur in other ways as well. For example, between athletes, one athlete bribing another to, shall we say, underperform, or judges being bribed to make an incorrect call. Now, if this was discovered, those people involved could be heavily fined, and the money was used to actually pay for statues at Olympia, naming more or less and shaming those involved. I think it's fair to say that there was always drama at the ancient Olympic Games, and not necessarily in what was going on in the sporting events.